Hello everyone, welcome to my Teralyst hunting tutorial. In this, I'm going to try and teach you all how to fight the standard Teralyst, the different attacks they can do, and how to deal with them. First off, I'll show you the build I normally bring to these fights. Now, you don't have to follow this example in its entirety, as there are plenty of other builds that work just as well, but this is the one I normally use for now as I kind of like it. I bring Harrow as my frame of choice as he can boost fire rate, reload speed, and heal with his 2, and his 4 can grant invincibility and high crit chance. My primary is the Lanka, normal go-to for Teralyst hunting, and I like the Nell as my secondary for the times I go down during the final damage phase. The melee weapon doesn't really matter. When choosing your frame, you want something that can buff yourself and or your allies throughout the fight. Good options are Harrow, Trinity, Rhino, Chroma, Volt, things like that. Depending on your frame of choice, you'll want to balance your mods accordingly. You wouldn't put range on Trinity because range doesn't affect blessing, but you would on Rhino because it does affect roar. For your primary of choice, you'll want something with good crits and radiation damage, as the Teralyst is weak to it. In this case, I've got my Lanka dealing 11,000 radiation with 62% crit chance and 5.6 times crit damage. You'll also want to mod it for multi-shot as best as possible. I've got a Riven on this one, but this is far from necessary, and honestly, in fact, it's a bit overkill. The secondary, I've run the same thing. Good crits, radiation damage, a bit of multi-shot. The secondary doesn't matter too much, as you most likely won't be relying on it as your main source of damage. It really is just a secondary source. I'll also very briefly talk about my operator, as it's pretty important. A large chunk of the Teralyst fight is in operator mode. I don't expect anyone to have what I do, but it's useful to know for later when you get into making your own amp. I've got Magus and Vigor for personal survivability here. My personal amp, the Spear of Justice, is built from the Schwach Prism, the Pencha Scaffold, and the Jutney Brace. My primary shot becomes a wide-range blast with a bit of punch through. The alternate fire is a charge shot with good damage and range. My recharge delay is only 1 second, making my downtime much lower than average. I've also got the Virtuous Knoll in there, but it doesn't really help much during this fight. Now, the next thing I'll go over is strategy. If you know what you need to do, the Teralyst fight's not hard. It's a big, slow, lumbering monster with a lot of telegraphs from its movements and sound effects. Now, your first step is to find it. The best way to do this is an Arcwing. At least one member of your team should fly up and spot where the monster spawns to mark it for the rest of the team. You can see where it's spawning by the Tower of Blue Light, which can be seen from anywhere. 1 or 2 members should go find Eidolon lures from the nearby Grineer camps and outposts. You'll need at least 2 in order to capture the Teralyst. After hacking them, you'll then need to charge them with Vomvalist spirits. Luckily, this is very easy to do during the Teralyst fight, so you don't have to go find Vomvalists before starting the fight. Each lure takes 3 Vomvalists before they're fully charged. Uncharged lures will passively damage nearby Vomvalists before destroying their physical form, before absorbing them. You can also damage the physical form yourself to allow the lure to absorb it, or use your operator amp to kill the spirit and pick up the orb that it drops and deliver it to the uncharged lure. You'll know when the lure is charged when it starts flashing and the shield icon above it changes from yellow to blue, as seen here. Once you have the 2 lures ready, you're prepared to start the fight with the Teralyst. Now, in fighting the Teralyst, your normal weapons can't damage it at first. You'll need to go into operator mode to lower its shields, represented by the purple bar covering its health. Depending on the amp each person uses, this can go by either quickly or very slowly. But more people means more collective DPS from void damage. You can also use your operator's void mode and your void dash to dodge attacks during this, which I'll get into later on. Once the shields drop down, the Teralyst will flash red, indicating you can damage his Synovias, or the links on his arms and legs. Before doing this, you'll want to make sure you have at least 1 lure fully charged, and if you don't, just hold off until one of them turns blue. Make sure to coordinate with your team on which Synovia to target so you can burst it down as quickly as possible. That device is insufficient. When a Synovia is destroyed, Anko will recommend you fall back, but don't do this. The Teralyst will let out a scream and release 5 large AoE magnetic pulses, but you can dodge them with your Operator Void mode. You'll want to do this so that the lures stay in range and stay linked to the destroyed Synovia, and keep the Teralyst from fleeing. After this attack, it will stand back up and regen half of its shields, and you repeat the process for the remaining Synovia. If you don't have a charged lure when you destroy the first Synovia, after the Teralyst does the magnetic retaliation, it will sink into the ground and vanish, reappearing somewhere else on the map. You'll need to find it again, and it will regenerate 75% of its shield instead of the 50%, which will further prolong the fight. Once the last Synovia is destroyed, the Teralyst will fall into a down position and let out another scream, summoning Vomvalists and calling them to its location. With each Vomvalist that reaches it, the Teralyst will regenerate a bit of its health back. You don't need to destroy all of them, but each one you keep from reaching the creature will decrease the health it will have in the final phase. The incoming Vomvalists will flash green, so they're pretty easy to spot, but they come from all directions. Now be careful, as the Teralyst will still be able to damage you through its passive attacks while you're searching for the smaller Eidolons. After a certain amount of time has passed, the Teralyst will stand back up and enter the final phase. You can damage it normally with any weapon no matter where you hit it, but it will attack much more aggressively than before. You can also land headshots on it now for bonus damage, which is further enhanced if your party has a Harrow. Simply lower its health to 0 to defeat it. Make sure before landing the killing blow, your 2 charged lures are close enough to link to it, otherwise you will not capture it. When you hear that shattering noise, that signals the creature is beaten. And if you see it start to float up in the air, then you manage to successfully capture it. Your 2 charged lures will absorb the Teralyst and explode, dropping a Flawless Core, an Eidolon Shard, a Random Arcane, a Brilliant Eidolon Shard, and several Exceptional Cores. Collect your spoils and congrat yourself, you've hunted down a Teralyst. Now I'll very quickly go over the Teralyst's different attacks and how to avoid them. First off are its Seeking Bullets. It will passively launch a small blue orb into the air, which will then burst into several homing projectiles. If you move quickly enough you can dodge them, but it's best to just use Operator Void mode. This attack has no animation from the Teralyst, so it can do other attacks at the same time. Its other passive is Sentient Residue. After destroying a Synovia, it will bleed teal pools of residue onto the ground, which deals damage if you stand in it. Destroyed armed Synovias will also launch Seeking Bullets that have stronger homing capabilities than the normal version. Next is its Ground Stomp, not to be confused with its Ground Smash. It lifts up its leg high off the ground and you'll hear a charging up sound. It will then stomp down, sending a massive shockwave out, knocking down and pushing away anything on the ground. This attack will still push you away even if you're in Void mode, so the only way to avoid it is to jump over it. Next is its Ground Smash, not to be confused with Ground Stomp. The Teralyst lifts its tree arm over its head and then slams it down, sending out ground quakes that home in to damage and stagger you. If they do not have a target, they'll go out in a star point pattern, a set distance, and then return to the center. Best way to dodge it is Void mode until they return. Next attack is the Gun Swing. It will swing its gun arm in an arc around itself while constantly firing, with the bullets creating an explosion on contact. This attack usually will go over your head if you're close to the Teralyst, but sometimes you might need Void mode to dodge it. Next up is Tree Swing. It swings the tree arm in an arc to deal close range damage to anyone standing a bit too close. Best way to avoid it is to back away from it, or you can use Void mode. This one isn't really an attack, but Summoning Scream. The Teralyst lets out a roar and glows a bright orange, which will summon and buff Vomvalists around it. No avoidance really necessary here. Also not an attack, but important to know, Regenerating Scream. The Teralyst screeches and glows bright blue. This will cause nearby non-buffed Vomvolus to link to the Teralyst and restore its shield over time, but only after the shield has been lowered. It will then be rendered invincible until the linked Vomvolus are destroyed, so kill them as quickly as possible. Coming up to the end, we have Energy Spikes, the attack the Teralyst uses after destroying a Synovia. Use Void Mode to dodge it. Your Warframe will still take the magnetic effect and lose its energy unless you have the means to restore it afterwards. And finally, the granddaddy of them all, Starfall. The Teralyst will brace itself, charge a shot in its gun, then fire it up into the sky, where it will burst. This will cause a rain of explosive projectiles in a radius of 200 meters around it, dealing heavy damage and knockdown with a slight homing capability. Interestingly, this attack will also hit through Frost's snow globe and even hit Limbo while in the Rift Plane. This attack goes on for quite a while and has a huge range, so my recommendation is to hold in Void Mode whilst poking out every couple of seconds to take a shot at him. And well, there you have it. Now that you've reached the end of this video, you've armed yourself with the most powerful weapon to fight the Eidolons, knowledge. Now you just need a 7 Forma Lanka and you'll be good to go. Thank you all very much for watching. Perhaps later on I'll put up a video on fighting the Gantulyst and Hydralyst as well. But until then, happy hunting.